What do you think when you see someone like Khabib, who was brave enough to speak out, and he was speaking out against this?
And it's a good thing that Khabib and others speak out. In going out on the streets and burning flags and smashing windows and all this stuff, this is not something we should do as Muslims. However,
By insulting the last and final messenger sent to mankind.
honestly, it is not Macron. It is not only Macron. Macron is just...
This is the Deen Show.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the D Show, and I got Dr. Keres, academic historian, here to fill us in on what's going on in France, give us some history, and also up-to-date current events. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, everything is fine from our side. I'm in the UK, alhamdulillah, not in France, so quite well everything.
So, bring us up to speed on what's going on in France right now. What's causing all the uproar?
Bismillah, salatu wassalam ala Rasulullah. Jazakallah khair, first of all, for the invitation. It is, well, unfortunately, not the best time to meet up and have talks about everything. But what it is, at this moment, is the best time to finally find out what was going on. Something that I've been describing actually for the last 3-4 years, since I started my career as a speaker. I've been talking about France actually for a very long time, mentioning the issue that France has as a country nowadays, which is a former colonial power, a country which used to be which used to have a lot of parts of the Muslim world, mainly in Africa, and still has a massive influence in Africa. So a colonial power which owned a third of Africa, if not even more, a colonial power which still actually plays the role of a colonial power in Africa mainly, and we're talking about countries such as in North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, all Arab Muslim countries, even sub-Saharan Muslim countries such as Senegal, the Gambia, even although the Gambia was British colonized, but still there's an influence from the French, Nigeria, and so on, up to Southern Africa, basically. This, of course, brought a heritage with them. They have, at this moment in the country, France has more than 5 million Muslims in the country. Some say between 4 and 8 million even. That's definitely more than 10% of the population, which is of the largest population anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. So the largest Muslim population in a country anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. Because of course, the colonial background, but also because they needed in the 1960s and 70s workers to come and work in their factories to help industrialize France further than it was. So that meant just go back to the former colonies, get people over here to come and work for you anyway. Algeria at that time, by the way, was still a département, an overseas department of France in the 1960s still. And so it was basically just getting some workers over from poorer parts of France. That's the way they were looking at it. And now we have a population of more than 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 million people of Muslim background, not only because of the background of migration, but also because we have a high conversion rate, by the way, in France, also one of the highest in the world, together with Italy, more than 500,000 up to 1 million French Muslim reverts, mashallah. And this is massive. And now we've reached the point that actually the idea of the state being a secular, laïc, as they say, basically a state which wants to separate religion, Christianity mainly, from the state heavily, so much so that even the priests don't get paid by the state, as it is in most other countries. So much so that the church has nothing to say in politics. The church is doing basically something on their own in the churches. The institution of the church basically has no influence in politics at all. And that influences the Muslim minority in France, because they say we don't want the Christians to be involved, the churches to be involved, so definitely we don't want the Muslims to be involved in our policy. So they have to be quiet, they have to shut up, basically sit in a corner and just do what they're told to do. And after a lot of controversies, the hijab controversy starting already in 1989, going into law in 2004, up to many other laws since that time, the burkini ban, which was also one that came up several years ago, meaning that women could not even wear the full swimming suit. Imagine that, which was common in the 1940s and 50s. Hijab, girls with hijab cannot go to university, cannot go to our institutions, cannot work in public places, cannot even enter public offices. We're talking about a suppression of Muslims, of a massively big Muslim population in France, which has been going on for the last decades. not only because of colonialism and during colonialism, but even after colonialism and nowadays, in such a way that certain Muslims react in a way that we know now that basically there has been violence, there has been aggressive behavior from the side of the Muslims, from certain Muslims. And now we have a situation that basically they have increased the terror alert in France at this moment, that they're saying basically that we are scared of our lives, we are scared of Muslim fundamentalism and radicalism because of what? One major incident that happened several years ago, the cartoons of so-called, freedom of expression, that they can basically insult our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and based on this, certain Muslims have reacted. There has been a beheading of a teacher at a school, as it said officially. That's the official version. And after that one, there was a problem in Nice, in one of the cities as well, that a church had been attacked. And we don't know more at this moment. I think 2 got killed, if I remember correctly. I don't know if you have some news about this one. So the church in Nice, I think 2 people got stabbed and killed, as far as I remember now correctly. So we've come to the point basically that, again, it's not a new thing, by the way, but for the ones who hear it for the first time, it seems to be something new, but it has been going on for the last 3 decades and more, that the Muslims in France are again under siege. And at this moment is the Muslims have to justify everything that is happening because of one individual or 2, and because of the state imposing their politics on the Muslims there. That is hopefully a very rough and general idea that I gave you now.
What was it always for the 3 decades you're talking about like this, or is it now increasing under this new president Macron? Can you tell us a little about him?
Look, honestly, it is not Macron. It is not only Macron. Macron is just one of the students of the Republic. He is just following the policy that started actually during colonial time with regards to the Muslims. And the feeling, the anti-Islamic sentiment, is not something that Macron came up with. It's not something that only Macron came up with. It's something that it goes even deeper. Macron himself is not even as bad as certain other elements in France. There are the extreme right-wing groups that are even worse than him. Imagine that. There is even worse than him. There is even worse than what we see at this moment. There are people who actually call for a total ban of Muslims in the country. A total ban, meaning send them all back to Algeria, send them all back to North Africa. As I said, because of colonialism, many of African descent, many people have gone to France, and many of them are living in France now, have French citizenship. We're talking about second, third generation, even if not even further down the line. And they're all French citizens with a Muslim background. So there are elements that actually ask them to go back to where they came from originally. And this is an outrage. I'm so upset about this whole situation simply because imagine now, Eddie, somebody comes and tells you, you need to go back to Bosnia because you're not American. You're not American because originally you come from Bosnia, so you need to come back. You need to go back. Imagine that. That's exactly the situation we're in now at this moment. In fact.
But you mentioned Algeria. I mean, isn't this where you had the French terrorizing the Algerian people for over 100 years? And then they forced many of them out of their country into France, and then they were coming from Algeria, and then they were working there. I mean, now they're telling them to go back to the place they originally terrorized them and did what they did to them, colonization and all that.
Right. Well, 1830, the French colonialists, they entered Algeria in the 1830s, and they kept it until the 1960s, more than 100 years, 132 years to be exact. And indeed, that time, as I said before, they considered Algeria not only a part, it was a département, one of the departments of France, meaning it was part of the motherland. I mean, not just a colony, but it was one of the departments of France. Imagine, like one of the states of the United States. So basically, if they lose this part, it's like losing a very important point of their state. So people there, although they were second-class citizens, but they were actually French citizens from the beginning. French was and still is nowadays the official language of Algeria next to Arabic. There are more Algerians who speak French than they speak Arabic, actually. At schools and universities, French is the main language and not Arabic. It goes that far indeed that you have Algerian people who don't even know Arabic, who are really like, I speak probably better Arabic than they do. And these very people, these were the people who were asked in the 60s to go over to France, to go over to the motherland, and help them out in their industrialization and help France out with building the factories and industrial power. So these very people who did that in the end, who went over to help France, are now asked, their children and children's children are now asked to go back to where they came from, where their grandparents came from, actually, go back to Algeria. So that's the outrage I found.
Do you think, because this is all under the pretext of freedom of speech, but is it true that even if you say something against a certain group of people in France, if you question the Holocaust, and you can give some more examples, if you insult the French flag, is that true? You can get fined. But then over here, it's under freedom of speech to go and insult over 2 billion Muslims worldwide by insulting the last and final messenger sent to mankind. Can you talk about this, a little bit of this hypocrisy?
Hypocrisy, double standards, call it whatever you want to. Of course, I mean, even an idiot can realize nowadays that something is going wrong there. I mean, something is going wrong with that country. Something is totally going wrong. It's totally out of proportion. There is absolutely no clarity anymore. What do they want actually from us? What exactly do the French want from the Muslims? What exactly do they want from their people? Or is it really, are they hiding behind the idea of actually human rights and freedom of speech and all this stuff? Do they actually really want the policy that Front National, the right-wing party, wanted the whole time? Get rid of the Muslims, get rid of everything that is Islamic in the country. Most probably that is the idea. And they're hiding it obviously behind the idea of freedom of speech. And indeed, as you said, 2 billion people in the world can be insulted, but the president of France, there is a fine on insulting the president of France. There is a fine on insulting the flag, the piece of cloth of France, and so on and so on. So that's clear hypocrisy, of course. Of course, I mean, and anybody has seen that, I think.
So there's literally a fine if you insult the flag or the president himself.
Yes.
Then you can get fined.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So what else can you tell us? Are there any people that you know, Muslims that you know down there? We're hearing that many masajid, mosques are being closed. A lot of charity organizations are being closed. Is this true?
Yes. We have the latest report that I got last week, actually. If I remember correctly, there is an organization in France which has been in the last 16 years, 15 to 16 years, has been busy with getting the rights, basically just simply asking for the human rights, which you in the States, you in America, North America, you will not be able to understand. You will not understand that there is something like people have to ask for their religious rights, for their rights to being citizens. Which is a given thing in America, in North America, in Canada. It's a given thing in the US. Whereas in France, it seems to be, and this is against nothing new, what I keep hearing from brothers I know there is that a simple thing, imagine now that if you send your child to school, they go to the canteen, they pick up their food, they sit down and say Bismillah, that this very child can be reported by one of the teachers that it's most probably radicalized. So it will go back. So the director of the school has the right to go back to the parents and ask them, what they do at home, what they teach their children, how much Qur'an, and if at all, and all this stuff. So imagine already learning Qur'an is being radicalized. Imagine basically just being Muslim is already being radicalized. I mean, the 5 daily prayers, that is considered as something being part of being radicalized. So what else can I say? I mean, this has really gone too far. It's gone too far, absolutely. And I think the problem here is that we in Europe, the rest of Europe, I have the feeling that Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, they all hide behind France, and they cannot wait for France to implement their policy so that they could go on with that. Now, alhamdulillah, I don't expect this in the UK. Britain is a country which I think has been always different and tolerant to the rest of Europe. So I expect that it will, inshallah, not swap over so much. But I think the effects can still be seen even here. That non-Muslims get radicalized towards Muslims, get aggressive towards Muslims, and start feeling threatened by the very presence of just being a Muslim there. Having Muslims in the country is already enough to feel threatened. So that's the influence that France's policy has, especially on the other countries in Europe.
Now, is this under, because you talk about that France being the capital of Christendom, is this correct? Does this have
Well,
anything to do with now religion, or is this more under the banner of secularism, or is this from which direction is it, or is it a mixture of both?
Well, if we look a bit back, 1789 with the big French Revolution, we should not forget that the French Revolution was what? It was a revolution against the church's power, against the power that the Catholics had at that time, very strong power, and they basically controlled politics. So after the French Revolution, the idea was, and they beheaded priests, right? I mean, this is something that is known. They beheaded clergy. So after that, the idea was to get rid of the power of the church, the power of Christianity, because there was just Christianity, basically, they had to get rid of. When Napoleon took over, and by the way, just to mention that again, I think I've seen one of the videos before that it's mentioned that Napoleon, when he arrived in Egypt, he proclaimed being the next Muslim leader. So in order to gain the population, of course, on his side, and to gain Egypt and North Africa for himself, so he proclaimed being a Muslim. Now, some say, there are some sources that say that he himself accepted Islam later when he was alone in France, and he died as a Muslim. Allahu Alam, if this is all true, Allahu Alam. Anyway, the point after that was, after Napoleon, there was the time that basically in the 19th century, the time of nationalism, okay, the 19th century of nationalism, where you will have a lot of nationalistic revolts and revolutions throughout Europe. On the Balkan Peninsula especially, you see people revolting against Christians, revolting against the Ottoman Empire, but also people as the Albanians, who were mostly Muslims, they also wanted an independent state, and they fought against the Ottoman Empire. So these people get independent. We have a Balkan Peninsula, we have an independent Europe in itself. The Ottoman Empire crumbles, becomes a Turkey as we know it nowadays, and then we have national states. These national states have to find themselves. And what is the ideology of France at this moment? Indeed, since 1905, the official laïcité, secularism, which is close to, I would call it fascism. The idea that they are this secular, because most countries in Europe proclaim to be secularist, okay? Meaning basically dividing state from Christianity, from religion. Fine. But no other country but France and Turkey, by the way, these two countries are the official secularist countries who claim to be holding the flag of secularism in the world. So it's just France and Turkey. Now, France, of course, has taken it much further. So since 1905, it is a laïc, a secular country, which is in war with religion. The problem is now, with Muslims coming into the country and becoming more and more, the structure of the demographics change. Suddenly we have 5, 6, 7, 8 million Muslims in the country, more than 10%. And these Muslims now demand their rights, which they can get because they're human rights, religious rights. So they've been getting them. But the problem is for the French, suddenly seeing that they fought Christianity before, Christianity has lost its power. French are not Christians as they used to be. But now they see that Muslims become a problem, so we need an identity. So what are we? If they are Muslims, what is our religion? So hey, we go back to Christianity. We actually claim Catholicism again back, but that does not mean that suddenly they start worshiping God, suddenly they go to churches. That does not mean it. Catholicism and Christianity in France is actually a part of their identity, meaning I am French, so I'm Christian. Because I'm Christian, I'm French. That's it, you know? But in order to actually have it's a point to go against Muslims. So we are Christians because we're not Muslims. That's it, right? So they are Muslims, we are Christians. That's the idea. That does not mean that they do follow Christian values and understanding of way of life, but they do take it as an identity. So Christianity has seen a kind of renaissance in France in order to be a part of their identity. So for that reason, Christianity has become stronger as a part of their identity in order to counter basically Islam and the Muslims. That's what is happening basically in France.
What do you think when you see someone like Khabib, who was brave enough to speak out? You know, he has a big following, and he was speaking out against this for Islam, and he has some words to say. What did you think about that?
SubhanAllah. First of all, congratulations to him and to Muhammad Ali. These are people, mashallah, who we should look up to, simply because they are not ashamed like many of our people are in general. you will see an average Muslim who works at a college, at university, whatever, and they're trying to hide that they're Muslim. So, alhamdulillah, these are people who come out with their deen, are proud of their deen, and that's how we should be. We should all be proud of our deen. And they come out with their deen, they're proud of it, and they don't have a problem with proclaiming their deen and actually even reprimanding people like Macron with regards to what they're saying. We have to protect our deen. Our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and our Islam they don't need protection because Allah is protecting them. There's no problem with that. So there is no need in going out on the streets and burning flags and smashing windows and all this stuff. This is not something we should do as Muslims. However, to speak out and speak up against what is happening, against what Macron is doing at the moment, and again, as I said, it's not a Macron thing, it's a French thing, against what is happening in France and in other countries, there is no doubt about it, we should all be doing that. And there was a Twitter storm, by the way, yesterday, on Friday, and there was a Twitter storm, and mashallah, I hope that it has gone worldwide. So I think it's a good thing. Something is happening, and I don't think it's bad, as long as we don't use violence, and we can respectfully go against this racist and Islamophobic behavior, then there is no problem with it, of course, yes. And it's a good thing that Khabib and others speak out, yes.
I mean, you'll see that this is like you said. I mean, someone who has that, like Muhammad Ali, he was somebody who was great inside the ring, but outside, this is what left his legacy. He was speaking against injustices. Khabib now has a chance to do the same, to go ahead and use that big following that he's been blessed with, a huge following, but now can set a trend with other. And how much impact can someone like him, or you have many of these football players from France, they're Muslim. You have other celebrities who have millions and millions of followers. Now, the average person can send a tweet, share Facebook, they can do that. And like you were saying, we don't condone violence, but use that freedom of speech that you have. Don't be so weak to the point that you can't share a post, share this video maybe, and go ahead and create some awareness. But how important it is for, let's say, celebrities, Muslim celebrities who are out there who have millions of followers, and now for them to also speak up in situations like this.
No, absolutely, mashallah. I mean, this is why I think also your show is very important, mashallah. I really think that we have to speak up as much as we can, even if our followers are obviously less than Khabib's, but still, I really believe that even if we reach 1,000 people, mashallah, we have done our part. Even if I've reached, recently I spoke again just 2 days ago, and tomorrow, inshallah, I'm going to be on a German podcast, inshallah. And this is very important because the German brothers, of course, are affected more heavily than we are, simply because they are bordering France and there is a connection with France. So it's going to be even more important to speak out, to mention this to the German speakers, and to speak out against this injustice and suppression. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Yes, absolutely.
Do you follow any football or what they call soccer, football? There were some reports that I don't know if that was fake or real, but something about some of the football players, they were also speaking out, just like Khabib was. Is this true, or did you hear anything about that?
I heard of one football player, soccer player. Yes, I heard of one who's Muslim, obviously, and he spoke out against it. And I read, the problem with Facebook nowadays, you don't know what is true and what's not true, that he actually quit the football team. A bit later, I received another report saying that it's a false claim. It's not true.
That's the one I'm talking about, yeah.
So I'm not sure what's happening at this moment. I'm clueless at this moment. I don't know what to believe, but something is happening. That's for sure. I think something is happening in the football team, and don't forget, a third of the football team of France's football team is Muslim. Half of them are foreign, coming from Africa mainly. So I find it extremely important to mention that. Yes.
Yeah, so that's why. Yeah, that's why I want to ask you about the Khabib, because I think strongly if people who are out there, you got people who are Muslim and they're in these positions. It's very important because the least we can do is create some awareness and help those who are, because it could be coming to a town near you. I mean, tomorrow it could be you, and now nobody's speaking up.
Absolutely. If you allow the French to do what they're doing, and this has been going on again for the last 2 to 3 decades in Europe, that France does something and the rest follow. So they're hiding behind what the French do. And I've realized that when I was living in Holland, actually, in the Netherlands, in the 1990s, I realized the same situation in France and in Belgium. Things were happening, especially the whole headscarf affair, and the Belgians and the Dutch were actually doing everything because they're smaller countries. Nobody would pay attention to them. Everything that France would do, actually, just on a smaller scale. But it was happening in the Netherlands as well as in Belgium, and now the burqa ban in Belgium, which again was not covered by the media so much because it's a small country, unimportant actually. But Belgium followed France, and the same the Netherlands. So you see that the neighboring countries, at least the neighboring countries, because as well Germany is also affected, Denmark is also affected. So they do follow and do everything that France actually does in big, they do it in a smaller scale. So that's why we need to definitely speak up. Absolutely. It's an obligation, no doubt about it.
A couple more questions. Tell us, is it true there is a museum or something of the like that they have in France where you have actually skulls in there?
Yeah,
and what is that? What's the significance of that museum?
Well, the museum was supposed to actually be a museum of humanity, okay, to show some kind of cultural, being a kind of show the heritage of humanity in the world. And what the idea is of putting 37 or even 67 of the freedom fighters, of the revolutionaries from Algeria and North Africa, put them in there and keep them in there, not sending them back to Algeria to their family. This, don't ask me, ask the French. But indeed, that is true. That is true. I even heard of another museum which I could not verify, another museum which has actually 18,000 skulls of people, of revolutionaries from mainly Algeria. I could not verify that, but I know the first one that I mentioned with skulls of main leaders of revolutionaries, that is correct, that is true.
How many innocent people died? What are the estimates in Algeria at this time?
Between 1.5 and 2 million people.
How many?
Between 1.5 and 2 million.
2 million innocent human beings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is indeed innocent what you correct, because many of them were not soldiers, many of them were indeed just civilians. The majority were actually civilians, women, children. In this, I mean, the French, they were just they did whatever they wanted to. And again, this is not something that I'm saying because of the situation now, because of Macron. If you go back to lectures that I've had the last 3-4 years, this is something I've been mentioning every time. We have to be aware. France is following a specific policy towards Islam, the Muslims in the Muslim world, especially Africa, in such a way that I would call it clearly a fascist state. Secularism that they follow is fascism rather than secularism.
Mm-hmm. So if you compare, you do a contrast, and you look at the rights that are guaranteed under the divine law in Islam to Christians, to Jews, and the dialogues that took place, can you say that there was this kind of oppression? I mean, where you have in the divine law, the Christians have their rights. You know, people of other faiths, they have their rights there, that you cannot take that as you have these people now just literally taking the rights of innocent human beings in their country.
SubhanAllah, yeah, SubhanAllah, of course, obviously. I mean, if we take it back, 1400 years ago, Rasulullah has given definitely the rights in Medina. If you look at Medina, and if you look at the constitution of Medina, by the way, which in Washington, D.C., is respected, you will be able, it is known in America, the constitution of Medina is seen as a model for other constitutions. And if you look at the constitution of Medina, you see the rights that are given to Ahl al-Kitab, the rights that are given to the Jews and to the Christians as a religious community. Now, that's where the point is. The French do not look at religion. They don't look at their religious communities. They look at nationalism, which they have defined as being a certain people, the best being white, of course, coming with having a certain historical background, which is within the borders of what is nowadays France, and having, of course, a background which takes them back to Catholicism mainly, and not even Protestantism or Orthodoxy. So it's Catholicism that they go back to, but not as religion, but as part of their identity, as I mentioned before. It's not that they have become religious people. They're taking it as part of their identity. So it's a contrast to the Muslims in the country. So indeed, the Muslims, subhanAllah, we can be proud of our constitution. We can be proud of what Allah has given us. We can be proud of what Rasulullah has left us behind. And this is what makes me personally so very upset. When you look at a person like Macron, for example, now this case, who, when he was 15, by the way, he had his wife was his teacher who had an affair with him, basically. Yeah? I hope this is known. That this very same child, was 15. That's how far his moral values go. But again, it is not only Macron. It is a general French problem, and the problem was there before Macron, and will most probably be there after Macron as well. Once the other presidents come up, whoever will be the new one. So that's why in France, for example, you have an issue of French Muslims having the French nationality, which are more than 10% and could actually have an impact on politics in France. Many of them did and do not vote. Okay, that I think personally is a problem, because if they don't participate in the voting system, the political system of the country where they live in, they allow the right wing to actually come up as it has happened. So that's why as Muslims, subhanallah, what can we say? If I have to come up with the ideas and the ideals that the Muslim constitution and an Islamic state would indeed come up with, France would be nothing in contrast to that, absolutely nothing. We should be really proud of what we have as Muslims, So again, it doesn't diminish the status of Allah with whatever this man says. It doesn't take away anything of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and our love to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. In the contrary, I would like to thank him actually for what he did, because again, it shows again like September 11. Most of the people who have become Muslims, whom I have met in the last couple of years in Europe, actually became Muslim after September 11. Now, before the time when I became Muslim, that was 10 years before September 11, I barely met any European, any German, French, American, whatever, who became Muslim. But most of them nowadays, I know, became Muslim after September 11 because they started getting curious about this deen, finding out what is that. Now we have a chance again to come out with Islam, and I'm very, very sure that it's actually going to be a good propaganda for us, inshallah, in general. Inshallah. Thank you very much, Macron.
Two individuals I want to mention, get your take on it, and then we'll close up. One is Heracles. Can we say that there's an ancestry here, if you look back towards with the French people, with Heracles, Macron connected here, where when he heard of a messenger and he got a letter directly from Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and the condensed version, just Abu Sufyan, before he accepted Islam, he was called in front of him, and then he asked certain questions about Prophet Muhammad. He wanted to know, and after asking those questions, at the end, he said that if he was with him, he'd be washing his feet. He would be himself washing the feet of Prophet Muhammad. So this is now after asking the right questions and getting to know him somewhat, but not even going to that extent. So what do you think now is a lesson that Macron and others can learn from Heracles?
It's a very good question, actually. Exactly. What can they learn from that? What they can learn is that after Heraclius, Heraclius came from the same area where I come from, right? He had a Byzantine background, Greek Orthodox background, and I'm sitting here talking to you about the beauty of Islam. And I'm sitting here talking to you, praising our Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, praising the deen, which is the best deen on this planet, mashallah. So, if you take this as an example, Monsieur Macron, be careful, because if you yourself don't accept Islam, then it will be one of your people later coming. It might be from a family, it might be children, and we have seen these cases in Holland, mashallah. For example, in the Netherlands, we know about a Dutch politician who was a right-wing politician, and he, mashallah, turned to become Muslim, and now at this moment he speaks out against Macron. Yeah. So, alhamdulillah, yes, they should take it as an example, and it's a good comparison.
He said that, he said that. He said he'd be washing the feet of Prophet Muhammad. Did he not say that?
He did, mashallah. As far as I know, yes, he did. So that means that, inshallah, Macron or somebody following him will be doing the same, inshallah.
And then you also have who's a French hero, isn't he? The former emperor of France. It's stated in July 1st, 1798, that Napoleon Bonaparte, that he said, "I respect God, His Prophet Muhammad, and the glorious Qur'an." What do you think lesson could he take from that?
Yes, as I mentioned in the beginning, because I thought that you would ask me that exactly. SubhanAllah, Napoleon, this is going around now. Indeed, we have a lot of authentic material, authentic sources that tell us that Napoleon Bonaparte admired Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, admired even the Muslims, but in the military way. Okay, he saw Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as one of the greatest military leaders, and he could learn from him. So he was not that arrogant to dismiss Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's one important point. Now, with regards to, as I mentioned before, when Napoleon arrived in Egypt, he proclaimed himself as being Muslim. He said, follow me, basically. He wanted to grab the Muslims. And most of the people, of course, we cannot look in nobody's heart, but most of the people say nowadays, historians also say, that he basically just made a claim, a false claim of being Muslim. However, what we know later, when he went back to France, Napoleon, when he went back into Europe, it said there are some sources, and I'm not 100% sure how authentic they all are, but I've read a lot about the indications that Napoleon was most probably even praying, that Napoleon had turned to Islam. Allahu Alam, I don't have 100%, and I don't want to just say something if I want to keep it into fact, but most probably something had happened in Napoleon's life when he came back, and he did utter what you just mentioned there, and others, even more important things, where he showed admiration for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Islam and the Muslims in the Middle East. So there are clearly authentic sources that clearly tell you that one thing we can say 100% Napoleon was not dismissing our Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was not at all on that level that Monsieur Macron is nowadays, and the Republic is nowadays. That's for sure. Now, if he accepted Islam or not, I hope for him that he died as a Muslim. That's it,
Yeah, so the first conversion was a fake one, but then there are some sources that possibly maybe towards the end that he did accept Islam. Now, we can't verify that 100%, but there would be a strong push also if that was true to cover that up. Would you say that would be something that people would want out?
I mean, of course, that is even more difficult to cover up. They cover up things that are clearer even. For example, in France, in the south of France, there was once an area which was called Fractiné in Arabic. That was an area in the 9th and 10th century where the Muslims had actually established themselves a part of Al-Andalus. So in the south of France, where the Côte d'Azur is, there was an area which was called Fractiné. So the Muslims had established themselves. There were French Muslims as well there, and they were living there in harmony as they were living in Al-Andalus during that time, in the Iberian Peninsula. And from there, they marched all the way through northern Italy and Switzerland, and they opened Switzerland, subhanAllah. So for around 100 years, Fractiné existed in the south of France. And this the French don't mention at all. This the French don't teach at all. They don't even engage with it. They even tell you that you're a liar, although we have authentic sources nowadays proven that this Fractiné existed. So yes, of course they will try to cover anything they can, even things that are even clear. Even them, you have to basically come up with authentic sources.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that with us and giving us some history and some insight to what's going on. Jazakallah khair. Thank you. And if you like this episode of the Deen Show, like this video, share this video far and wide, and support us on our Patreon page so we can continue this work. Thank you for tuning in. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum.
Subscribe right now.